Edward John Smith was born on the 27th of January 1850 in Hanley, Staffordshire, England. His father, Edward Smith, worked as a potter or pottery maker, and his mother was Catherine Hancock. Later on, they would work together in a grocery shop, which they owned. As a child, Smith attended Etruria British School, but when he was around 13 years old, he left. He soon found work on the Staffordshire canals, working at the Etruria Forge as a steam hammer operator. A few years later, at the age of 17, he made his way to Liverpool, hoping to follow in the footsteps of his half-brother, Joseph Hancock, who was a captain on a sailing ship. While there, he began his apprenticeship by signing on to the crew of Senator Weber. Smith worked hard, and after years of training, he slowly rose up the ranks. In 1871, he became a second mate. 2 years later, he was a first mate, and by 1875, he earned the title of Master, meaning he could now command his own vessel. Smith started off in command of a 1,000-ton cargo ship called Lizzie Fennell. 5 years later, he joined the British shipping company White Star Line as the fourth officer of the ocean liner SS Celtic. Then, in January 1887, Smith married Sarah Eleanor Pennington. They later went on to have a daughter called Helen, and when Smith wasn't out at sea, his family home was in Southampton, Hampshire. After years of experience, he began to rise in status. By 1887, he commanded his first White Star vessel, SS Republic. A year later, Smith earned his extra master's certificate and then joined the Royal Navy Reserve. The letters R&R were added to his name, so that in time of war, he could be called upon to help the cause, serving as a lieutenant. In 1895, Smith was given command of the Majestic. He would remain as captain for almost an entire decade. 4 years later, the Second Boer War broke out, and as Smith was a Royal Navy Reserve, he was called upon to serve. In command of the Majestic, he transported troops to the Cape Colony, now South Africa. In total, Smith made 2 successful trips, with everything going smoothly. His reputation continued to grow, and many considered him a safe captain. Smith was later awarded with a transport medal for his service during the Second Boer War. In November 1903, the RMS Baltic was launched, and around 7 months later, she sailed from Liverpool to New York on her maiden voyage, with Smith as captain. The RMS Baltic was known for its luxury, and was the largest ship in the world at the time. It was probably owing to this that Smith became known as the Millionaires Captain. He was held in high esteem by his company and frequent travellers. This good standing led to some passengers only sailing the Atlantic on a ship which he captained. 3 years later, White Star Line gave Smith the command of the next luxurious new ship, the RMS Adriatic. She was the largest and fastest ship that Smith had ever captained, and once again, the maiden voyage in May 1907 went smoothly. Around that time, the Cunard Line were White Star Line's strongest competitors, as their ocean liners, Lusitania and Mauretania, were very successful. To try and get ahead, in 1907, White Star Line announced it was building new ocean liners. The first of these to be launched was the Olympic. It was the lead ship in a new class of ocean liners and was the largest vessel in the world. By now, Smith was 60 years old and one of the world's most experienced sea captains. Naturally, the company asked him to command the Olympic on her maiden voyage in June 1911. The journey went smoothly, but while in New York Harbor, a small docking incident took place, causing a smaller vessel to get trapped under the Olympic's stern. This tugboat, which was helping the Olympic to dock, was eventually freed. On the 20th of September 1911, the Olympics' first major accident occurred under Smith's command. While navigating the Solent, which is the strait that separates the Isle of Wight from mainland England, she collided with the British warship HMS Hawke. Due to the crash, Hawke lost her bow while the Olympic's propeller shaft was twisted. Despite the damage, both ships managed to safely dock. This incident went to court. Ultimately, Hawke was found free from any blame. It was stated that the large amount of water displaced by the Olympic's massive size generated a suction that had drawn Hawke off course. White Star Line appealed the initial sentence, but this decision was later confirmed by a superior court. This resulted in a financial disaster for White Star Line, not only because of the damages they had to pay, but also due to the cost of reparations and the money lost while the Olympic was out of service. All of this delayed the completion of the Titanic. Despite this setback, Smith was again called upon to command White Star Line's newest ship, the Titanic. She was famous for being the biggest ship in the world, as well as one of the most luxurious. It was claimed that Smith would retire after the maiden voyage, but in truth, he stated that he would captain the ship until a larger and finer ocean liner was completed. On the 10th of April 1912, the RMS Titanic left Southampton for her maiden voyage across the North Atlantic. When she left Southampton Harbour, Titanic almost had a collision with the dock liner New York as she passed so close to the other ship. Fortunately, quick action from Smith and tugboat pilots prevented an accident. The Titanic stopped in Cherbourg, France, and then in Queenstown, Ireland, to pick up mail and passengers. After this, she made her way to New York with more than 2,200 people aboard. After 4 days at sea, everything was going fine. Passengers were happy and conditions seemed normal. But then, on the morning of the 14th of April, radio operators received the first warning about drifting ice. Once Smith got word, he immediately posted this message on the bridge. As the day progressed, more ice alerts were picked up, and by the afternoon, passengers started to notice the ice drifting in the sea. Because of this, Smith decided to steer a more southern course. Despite the nearby drifting ice, the speed ship was maintained at 22 knots, which was 2 knots short of her maximum speed. This was later criticised as reckless. However, at the time, this was a common maritime practice. A widespread myth is that Smith was trying to set a speed record, but in truth, he followed standard operating procedures. For ocean liners, being punctual was very important, so drifting ice on a ship's course wasn't enough of a reason to slow down. Well, ice wasn't really seen as a safety hazard, but more of a nuisance, because many ships that collided with ice would usually only get dented. Furthermore, ocean liners relied on lookouts to spot icebergs from afar, allowing them to have enough time to avoid a potential collision. With the warnings posted on the ship's bridge, at around 7:30 p.m, Smith attended a private party in the Titanic's a la carte restaurant. Following this, he spoke with his second officer on the bridge and then went to bed. That night, the wireless officer, Jack Phillips, was exceptionally busy, having been swamped with telegraphic messages for passengers. While he was hard at work, Phillips received an alert from the Mesaba about icebergs. He acknowledged the message, but he didn't pass it on to the bridge. Later on, another warning was received from the nearby SS Californian. The transmission was cut off by operators, meaning the officers on the bridge had no idea that they were heading into an ice field. It was around 11:40 p.m. when a crew member spotted that they were headed straight for an iceberg. Despite efforts to move the ship away, there wasn't enough time, leading to the Titanic scraping against the iceberg. The ship was seriously damaged, and water quickly started rushing into holes created by the impact. After the collision, Smith was awoken and informed of the incident. The designer of the Titanic, Thomas Andrews, learned that various of the ship's watertight compartments had been breached. He stated that Titanic would sink in under 2 hours. Following this, Smith's response to the crisis is unclear, as many sources and claims are completely contradictory. Some witness accounts portray him in a positive light, claiming that he was doing everything in his power to get women in his boat and to see that they were being lowered properly. One first-class passenger stated, "Captain Smith was the biggest hero I ever saw. He stood on the bridge and shouted through a megaphone, trying to make himself heard." Yet some historians state that he was indecisive and ineffective during the crisis. It's said that Smith knew that the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats, meaning even if they were full, thousands would go down with the ship and most likely die. Supposedly, as he realized the gravity of the situation, he went to his quarters for some time and locked himself away. Other negative reports note that Smith was unable to adequately coordinate his crew. Apparently, he didn't pass on crucial information, supervise the loading of lifeboats, or check if his orders were being followed. Smith was also criticized as he allowed many lifeboats to leave the ship only partially filled. Supposedly, Smith never gave the order to abandon ship, and it was just minutes before the Titanic started its final plunge that he released the crew from their duties. He then did one last check of the deck and told his crew, "Now it's every man for himself." At 10 minutes past 2 in the morning, it's reported the captain said, "Well done, boys. Do your best for the women and children and look out for yourselves." Smith was then seen headed for the bridge. What happened to him afterwards is unknown. At 2:20 AM on the 15th of April 1912, the Titanic disappeared into the dark, cold waters of the North Atlantic, about 400 miles south of Newfoundland, Canada. Around 1,500 people, including Smith, died at sea that night. His body was never recovered. Several conflicting accounts emerged about how his life ended. Some witness reports mention that he had shot himself on the bridge. Others state that he was carrying a child and managed to get the child on the lifeboat before slipping beneath the water. But these accounts are most likely false. Some survivors remark that they saw Smith enter the ship's wheelhouse on the bridge and die there when it was engulfed. When he was in command of the Adriatic, Smith had stated that some of us would go to the bottom with the ship. When asked what would happen if his ship was badly damaged. Because of this, it's widely believed that he went down with his ship. Thanks everyone for watching this video on Edward Smith. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. If you're new, why not subscribe? That's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Lives. Thanks.